Book 90 of 2019 was A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. I didn't enjoy this book. It was kind of told as a story. There was very little information in it, very little novelty in it. And I understand that you perhaps should judge a book by the context of the time it was written in. And so for this one, Virginia Woolf was far ahead of her time. She was, some of the kind of feminist attitudes that she was talking about in this book were things that are kind of discussed today and debated today. And she was far ahead of her time, I think, for what she was writing about. She talks a lot about the discriminatory treatment of women in her time, and how a lot of the kind of attitudes of the time were unchallenged, and that these were caused by things systemically. So, for example, in her time, women had a lack of power. They didn't have kind of financial freedom. They had a lot of restrictions over their finances. They, didn't have any right to an income. They didn't have any right to property, and they themselves were actually the property of men. And so she kind of discusses all those kind of things. And then she talks also about something that was quite interesting that she talks about, was that before the 18th century, women's lives are not documented by women. They're documented from the subjective perspective of men. And so it's very difficult to understand what a woman's life would have been like before the 18th century within our culture. I always kind of think that when I'm reading about like lives in the past, that you've got to understand it from the perspective of the person that's writing it. And a lot of the time they are kind of like rich white middle class men, because they're the only ones that kind of had the money to get published, I guess. And so, we know a lot about how writers have almost kind of misrepresented, not almost, they have misrepresented cultures, for example, and referred to different cultures as savages and stuff like that, which is not the case. It was just kind of their perspective, ethnocentric perspective. And so similarly, the same thing could have been happening with women and the way that they were portrayed in things like literature and stuff. So she kind of brings that up as an interesting point. I'm sure this book was probably revolutionary for its time, because she's a woman and she's writing, and she's kind of mentioned that she has this ability to write because she's being funded by one of her like rich relatives. I can't remember if she died or if she gave her an income. I can't quite remember. But without that opportunity to have that financial backing, she wouldn't have been able to write what she wrote. And I think she was kind of drawing the parallels towards women in general, that women couldn't really achieve very much because they didn't have that financial stability like men had got, or at least some men. Obviously not all men would have done, because some of them would have been working class, but I guess she's not working class because she's affording to live and write as she wills. So yeah, it was just basically like talking about feminism, but old feminism, and there wasn't anything new in there, and it didn't, it wasn't insightful for me. I know a lot about feminism already, and so I was just like really disappointed. I kind of, Virginia Woolf is kind of somebody that everyone kind of raves about, in the same way though that they rave about old classic like literasts, and it's just like, it's not that good if you think about it in terms of contemporary context. So I wouldn't recommend reading it.